Welcome to Breakpoint, the ServiceNow Developer Podcast.
Hello, ServiceNow admins, builders, developers, and curious individuals that I say with the utmost love and respect. Welcome to, or welcome back to the Breakpoint Podcast, the ServiceNow Developer Podcast, here to bring you all the latest tools, tips, and tradecraft to accelerate your developer career. My name is Laura McManaman, and I am your host today and your sole host today. I figured that we'd had a bunch of phenomenal guests on the podcast recently, which I'm extremely blessed to have conversations with. So it's time to take it back a little bit, time to take a chill pill and try out some more experimental topics to investigate here today. Now, by proxy of talking to a lot of our phenomenal product team members, a lot of our episodes have also been very product focused, which makes sense. Zerg has just come out, so obviously we're wanting to highlight all the latest and greatest that the platform has to offer, but there are a lot of traits and talents that make a developer an amazing member of the ServiceNow community, and so I wanted to explore kind of a newer topic that we hadn't discussed yet here on Breakpoint: content creation. You know, I recently hit my 3-year anniversary on the developer advocacy team. It has made the world to me to be part of such an amazing organization and an even more amazing, larger community team. And in those 3 years, I felt that I have grown and changed a lot in the content creation methods that I've employed. Now, obviously, I sit here today as a podcaster to you, but I would argue the vast majority of content that we produce at a developer level is, of course, video content. And of course, with the more content create, the more questions we often get about that process. There are a few things that really represent a mastery of knowledge other than teaching others. And so I see more and more developers today try to employ content creation as a way to really beef out their resume and beef out their portfolio to showcase their expertise in certain subject matters. So for today, I thought it'd be very interesting to explore personally what I have found to help improve my method of content creation, but do so from the perspective of someone just starting out. If you've been making videos for years and are looking for the latest tips on all the Premiere shortcuts and fancy video and lens work, this is not for you per se. Maybe someday I'll get to a point where I can present on that. So today, though, we are really talking about, hey, I would like to start making content. Where do I begin? And so if you're looking at this video, that is what we're going to be talking about. Because of this, every recommendation I make here today will either be something completely free or something that the vast majority of people already have at their disposal. So keep in mind, there is no cost to starting a content creation journey. And then finally, small little asterisk here, this is just the way I do it. In fact, there are millions of videos already on YouTube that talk about how to make engaging videos, tips and tricks for lighting and sound quality and video quality, etc. But over the years, if you've liked the content that the developer advocates make or that I make personally, this could be an interesting watch for you. I'm also very curious to see how this process differs from the other content creators out there. So if you have tips and tricks, please leave them in the comment section down below as well so that others can benefit from your knowledge. And with all that being said, let's dive straight into the first part of content creation, which is the ideation phase. Now, obviously, technical content is all about educating people and helping people, in this circumstance, ServiceNow specifically, but maybe other forms of development as well. And before you start even investigating topics in which you want to make your videos on, you should really specify on who you're making your videos for. Determining your content's specific audience can be based off of a lot of things. But let's be real, how much you can help a specific demographic of developers also goes back to your experience in that specific demographic. I mean, case in point, look at me, for example. You don't see me making a lot of videos on UI Builder because, frankly, I do not have the expertise to make comprehensive videos on UI Builder. However, having been part of the Creator SC team for years, a lot of our work was done in Flow Designer and now formerly called Workflow Studio. And so you'll see my content kind of leans more into that end of quote unquote back-end development, but more so from the wizard style of designer or low-codey perspective. That was not only the method in which I built in when I was a formal developer, but also the software that I spent the vast majority of my career advocating for to other customers on why they are valuable. And going back to an earlier point I made, you heard me mention the low versus pro code aspect. There is a humongous variety of the technical acumen of developers out there on ServiceNow. And so that can be also part of their specific intended audience. Am I making something for someone that is a professional that has been doing this for many years and wants to get even more in the weeds on a topic? Or is it introductory? Is it for someone that has never even heard this word before and really is interested in becoming part of this world? Again, going back to my career in solution consulting, that was my job, was saying, hey, person that's never even barely heard of ServiceNow before, here is why you should care about PDIs. Here's why you should care about source control integration, which before today meant nothing to you. So a lot of my content revolves in those spaces. Not only because I feel confident in presenting to them and have the expertise to kind of dive into them automatically without a tremendous amount of research, but I also know a lot of that demographic's pitfalls. I know what questions they've been asking because I was the person asking them years ago. I know what hiccups they encountered because they were the hiccups I tripped over earlier in my career. I know the aspects of the platform that might seem intimidating to them because they intimidated me. And so that should all factor into what specific demographic that you are targeting as a content creator before, again, you even look into topics. But once you've got that figured out and you know your intended audience, you need to start coming up with topics. Now, initially, that comes very easily. Obviously, when you come to a point in your life where you're thinking, I want to be a content creator, it's usually because you already have a couple of ideas, either because you were looking for a video that you found didn't exist, or there's a lot of topics that you're interested in diving into that no one has really explored to the depth in which you wanted. But then you'll hit the roadblock. You will find that initial list that really got you interested in content creation unfortunately ends very quickly. And so anyone that spent any time on YouTube knows that there is an important factor in content creation, and that is consistency. And part of consistency in producing content, whether it's weekly or bi-weekly or monthly or quarterly, is that you have to have a topic. So what I suggest and what has worked for me is carving out a specific amount of time for investigation. That time, again, that time can be weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly. It depends on what you actually want to produce. But creating a master list of info dumping is a really good way to get started. I spend a lot of time at what I affectionately call like gold mines of content, which is oftentimes comments on other YouTube videos, comments on LinkedIn, comments on Twitter or webinars that ServiceNow is putting out, or honestly, ChatGPT. One amazing boon that AI offers is the ability to aggregate tremendously large amounts of data that would take you weeks, if not years, to do so yourself. And so, utilizing ChatGPT, you can kind of help dive into topics that people might be investigating. Another interesting part about aggregating topics is sometimes you start too large. You find that there's a topic that could be split into multiple videos or multiple videos for different circumstances. Perhaps initially you come into this wanting to create a video that was just a tutorial on Workflow Studio. But then you quickly realize that maybe things should be separated out. One should be defining what Workflow Studio is and why it's important. One should be about maintaining your flows over time. One should be about the specific Zurich updates, etc. So not every single topic has to be a completely novel thing. You can easily break things out into smaller subsections. In fact, that's what I recommend. YouTube has waffled a lot in its time as a website on what type of content it likes to promote, but traditionally it likes to promote videos that have a high watch time. You are completely at liberty to make one master video that's 3 hours long and goes through every single incremental piece of a certain ServiceNow product. However, the watch time, admittedly, will probably be slim depending on what people are searching for. I'm not saying you should defer to 10-second videos unless you want to be a shorts producer putting things on TikTok. But I think there's a happy medium between these marathon length videos that cover every single little thing and shorter, briefer ones that also add to the searchability title-wise. So at this point, we have carefully constructed our intended audience. We have created a list of topics that we are interested in creating content on and kind of pseudo-determined how frequently we would like to do so. Again, the YouTube algorithm heavily rewards consistency, even the consistency over long periods of time. And so we enter into the next phase of content production, which is construction. Now, this is the first hot take that'll probably get me in a little bit of heat with certain people, but I heavily recommend scripting out your videos. Now, a script does not have to be a teleprompter specific entity. It can be bullets. However, initially, it's very difficult to talk directly to a lens. I'm struggling with it right now, and I've been making videos basically once a week for 3 years. Not only can scripting help take the pressure off those scenarios and help keep you focused on the topic at hand, but it can also really help you nail the trickiest part to the video, the first 10 seconds. Now, probably the most humbling thing that will happen when you start creating content is that you are given access to YouTube Studio. YouTube Studio is a blessing and a curse because it showcases, the breadth in which your videos are reaching different continents and different demographics of people you never thought would be hearing your words. But then it'll also show you how many people click next within the first 30 seconds of turning on your video. Let me restate, this is a common occurrence. Think about how many times you personally have done this with a YouTube video, whether it's because you don't like someone's voice, the topic didn't really match the title, or you just had to go run and do something else. It happens all the time. But really nailing those first 10 seconds can help reduce it a bit. Not only can it act as a hook, but it can give the audience a nice snapshot of what type of video this is going to be. People tune out of videos mostly for one of two reasons. One, the thumbnail and the title did not specifically describe the video accurately. So we'll go into that later. But two, did you know that one of the leading causes of people skipping videos is bad audio? People can get over a fried looking video that's kind of blurry and kind of crappy lighting wise. But if the video audio is bad, people will leave. So we write a hook that not only really brings the listener in on our topic matter and describes it accurately, but we demonstrate that, hey, we are professional, we've set up a good quality video, and it's worth their time. Now let's talk about a hook. There's lots of interesting hooks that we can kind of explore. And I think the first is being blunt with what this video is. I gotta tell you, I cannot stand a technical tutorial that starts with a 10-minute monologue about who the person is. Sometimes I just wanna know how to do X or Y. And so flat out stating what X to Y is and then jumping right into it is honestly one of the best hooks a technical video can have. You can always show your name as some sort of graphic. You don't need to introduce yourself every time, especially if it's some sort of short tutorial on how users can do something. Just get to the point. That's an honestly great hook. Another great hook that kind of brings people in a more alluring storytelling fashion is asking them a question or stating an interesting statistic or giving a hard truth. These are more the tactics they employ in things like movie trailers and things like that. And so they're not as just jumping into the content, but they are also equally as alluring to listeners, especially if the video is more of a conceptual discussion or things like that. Now, another huge benefit of having a script is that I know more or less how long the video will be. In fact, I have a better insight on how long the video will be by throwing in my script to, again, ChatGPT. It can give me a nice estimate on how long the video will be, and I can make judgments from there. Using the favorite AI of your choosing, you can determine, hey, maybe the video is too long. Can you abbreviate this script but really focus on these specific topic matters to lean into more? Or if the opposite is true, in fact, it's too short, what other information is lacking from this topic that you think would be valuable? I personally write the first version of the script myself and then utilize ChatGPT to edit it from there. But do what makes you comfortable. Some people put out a whole list of bullets, say, hey, create me a script, and then they edit that into some sort of V2. But honestly, utilizing things like ChatGPT as an editing assistant has really reduced my video production time by hours. And then finally, another huge advantage to having some form of script is that you can storyboard your video. Very rarely is a video just someone speaking to a camera with nothing else. I mean, podcasts like this are honestly more or less the only form that kind of still does this format. And even then, a lot of podcasts have multiple angles of cameras. By having a script ahead of time, you can tell, well, maybe I need a screen recording of the software here. Maybe I need some B-roll of someone working in an office that kind of humanizes the context of the use case or something like that. Maybe I want to add in a blooper reel at the end, who knows? But having that script nailed down lets you know where those elements could naturally occur the best. It also lets you start getting a feel for where you can add in interactive elements to your video. Aside from watch time, YouTube really rewards videos that have a high amount of interaction. Honestly, that's why you see the success of what, are today known as like rage baiters, people that do things intentionally to make people upset just so they get lots of comments about it. It's unfortunate, but it really showcases how true that statement is, where if a video is highly interacted with, the algorithm promotes it. So naturally, it's nice to recommend things that prompt a discussion in the comments. Keen listeners to the podcast will realize I already did this. I asked you earlier on to, hey, give me your recommendations down below. That was an earnest ask, but as a content creator, it's also part of my methodology. Aside from commenting too, it's always nice to naturally link a video for people to keep going. Watch time does not just mean the percentage of the video viewed. It means how long can I keep this person on YouTube? So therefore, if you can make a natural recommendation for what people should watch next, and it's still one of your videos, you're even more in the clear. So I try to weave a thread either to an existing video or playlist, or God forbid something off of YouTube, but it's still our content. Now, we know our audience, we have our topic. We have planned out our topic, we know what we need to shoot, what we are focusing on. So it's time for the big moment. It is time to record our video. First and foremost, like I said initially, to record videos for YouTube, you do not need anything other than what you already have. Now, again, I'm making some assumptions here, but I would assume that the vast majority of people have a smartphone, and that's it. I hate the methodology that's like, you need all this gear and you need all these lighting. No, you do not. Let me really reaffirm. You do not. The vast majority of content creators start out with just their phone mounted on, okay, maybe I was wrong. You know what you do need? You need a phone tripod. That's what you need. I'm serious. As long as you have a quiet room with adequate front-facing lighting, that is all you need. Never factor in the cost making into content creation until you have a system down pat, or frankly, a company that's willing to pay for it. Now, once you have your phone mounted, once you have your lighting facing you, it is time to start recording. Now, I will say this, I've talked with a lot of people that are interested in creating videos, but they do not want to be on camera. I will say that's fine. However, if you would like to build an online brand, I would say it's almost mandatory nowadays. There are tons of wildly successful ServiceNow or otherwise developer YouTube channels that are quote unquote faceless. They are just someone teaching people how to do subjects. However, it is difficult for someone to develop a parasocial bond to someone that is faceless, someone that does not describe elements of their life or integrate personal branding in that way. It is simply just a tutorial channel. They will use those tutorials, but unfortunately, it's harder to establish a brand in that manner. Now, one workaround for this would probably require a cost, but you could create an avatar of sorts. I have seen people do that where they create multiple PNGs of some sort of avatar, whether that is 3D generated or it's some sort of drawing of them in like different poses to indicate different emotions. So if you would like to remain anonymous, but still want to kind of familiarize yourself with an audience, that is a suggestion. I will say, I don't think I've ever seen ServiceNow content creators do that. So if you want to be like the first ServiceNow VTuber, be my guest. Now, when you start recording, the other thing to really be cognizant of is to look at the lens. I see a lot of beginner content creators look at themselves in the lovely, in the lovely monitor like I am doing right now, but look how unnatural that looks. It's very obvious I am not looking at the lens. So as difficult as it is, look at the lens of your camera or of your iPhone. I think a nice workaround for this, honestly, is something that I've used in the past, is I have cut out like a picture of a friend or family member, and I've put it over the face monitor, just so that like once it's framed and stuff, that I know I'm in the center with at least 2 or 3 inches above my head. That's the recommended aspect ratio. I put a picture over it just so that it feels like I'm talking to a friend and I'm also not distracted by my gesticulations. Now, when I'm recording content, of course, I do have my script. Currently, my script, or quote unquote, I just have bullets for this because podcasts are a bit more loosey goosey. My bullets currently are directly underneath the monitor. I have my iPad set up, but you could always print them out. You could write them on a whiteboard. There are lots of means around this. Now, one thing I personally do is that I try to do things line by line. So, if I am doing this to you here today, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see me do this. I will say something that I'm intending to say. I will usually try to hold my pose, and then I'll cheat down below and I'll look at my notes. I'll come back up and then resume talking. This looks wacky when I'm looking at the footage later, but obviously it's so A, I can look at my script, I don't have to memorize it, but B, when I cut those pauses out, it looks more fluid. Editing footage is not very fun. It's even kind of wackier if you have a lot of cuts. But this way, A, I don't have to memorize my script. And B, when those things are cut together, they look pretty synonymous from where the previous clip ended and the other one starts. As far as recording goes, usually for the script length, the video length usually ends up being sometimes double, if not triple. And that's because obviously everyone makes mistakes, myself included. There will be multiple bloopers from this specific video. In fact, here, I'll put some right now. Why does it keep lagging? Now, I know this is a bit more of an experimental topic. Bobo, you gotta stop yawning. YouTube has waffled a lot on time as a YouTuber based off of things that we're done. Stinky baby. Okay, I hope everyone got a good chuckle out of that one, just to know that you're not alone in this. And so, obviously, when you've stopped recording, you've finished all that you need to do, it is time for the next phase, which is the worst phase. It's the editing phase. Now, like I said, the end footage is probably 2 to 3 times the length of your intended length for the video. For whatever the intended length for the video is, let's say like this, let's say it's for an hour. You can probably expect around 8 hours of editing. The average intro editing time for anybody creating content is 8 times the length of the end product. That is why people fall off from content creation, or frankly, that's why people hire editors. Editing is by far not only the most time consuming aspect of content creation, but frankly, it's kind of the most painful too. I don't know about you, but personally, I don't like listening to the sound of my own voice, and I definitely don't like watching myself on camera. I find myself cringe a lot of the time. It's not the most fun. It's not the most fun unless you are one of the most confident, well-adjusted people on earth. But anyone that's recorded a voicemail message knows it's just like, this is just giving me the ick. Now imagine that for 8 hours. And that is what it's like to edit one of these episodes of Breakpoint. I'm not saying that to scare you off from content creation. In fact, far from it. I'm saying that to bring you into the reality that is being a content creator. If you're wanting to create a video every week, that's an entire work day on top of your work-life balance. Now, generally, videos aren't necessarily an hour in length, so it's not necessarily going to be that long, but sometimes it is. So I just want to make sure you're well aware of that expectation before diving into this, and definitely before buying any stinking camera equipment. Now, because there are so many variety of places to edit, this is where I kind of have to be a bit more generalized in my recommendations, but I'll tell you how to treat your footage. The first thing you should do when you are importing your final footage into whatever editing software you're using, and there is a lot of free editing software out there, whether it's built directly into your operating system or something you can get online like DaVinci Resolve or CapCut. The first thing you should do is check your audio. Remember what I said. The number one reason people don't watch a YouTube video they clicked on is because the audio is bad. The audio can be garbled, but what's even worse is when the audio is super peaky, it's super loud, and you're just like, oh my gosh, this is so overwhelming. And so the first thing you do before you make any cuts in your video is check your audio levels. I'm not going to get too in the weeds on this, but there should be a little bar indicating the loudness of your speech when you play your video back. A sweet spot for most of those peaks to hit is a -6. I know that doesn't really mean anything now, but if you're just going off of kind of eyeballing this part before diving into any other content on audio manufacturing for video content, that is the recommendation. Usually you can right click your footage and normalize your peaks, is what they're called, to whatever level you determine. A -6 is a good ballpark for most spoken word in a video. The next thing you should do, again, before making any cuts, is syncing up your footage. So perhaps you are doing a tutorial in which you are demoing something on ServiceNow and that you recorded the audio that matched it beforehand, or you recorded the video of your talking head before it. You want to make sure those things line up. And typically, if you recorded them all at the same time, they will also have all the same natural pauses that every version of that film does too. Now, a lot of editing software, again, has the ability to actually synchronize based off of an audio track. So even if it hears you faintly speaking in the background versus another one that has a very clear, nice mic, it can usually sync them up. So determined on whatever editing software you use, look into that before, again, making any cuts in any of your videos. So after leveling your audio and after syncing up your clip or clips, it is time to start going through it. Ooh, the worst part. But the nice thing about rewatching your video is that you can kind of multitask things while you're doing it. So your intended goal with going through and making a first pass is cutting out the gunk, cutting out the pauses, cutting out the ums, cutting out the misspoken phrases or things you just don't want in your video. You want to go through and cut all that out. But while you're doing that, this is also a great time for two other things. The first one is labeling. So a lot of editing software also allows you to color coordinate certain parts of your clips. And in your head, those colors can mean certain things based off your storyboard. Now, remember when I said you're storyboarding things out, you were probably planning, hey, I wanted to add in some B-roll here. Hey, I wanted this to be a clip of so-and-so walking through the office, or hey, this should be a zoomed in mobile version of the app that I've been demoing on desktop. You can do that in color coordination so that when you add those things in later, you already know where to put them. Similarly, you can also do this with the chapter element of YouTube. So I mentioned in the beginning that sometimes it's best to break down larger topics into smaller videos, but even within those smaller videos, you can further break them down using timestamps. So YouTube has a functionality where if you put in any timestamp, so anything that's like number, colon, number, and someone clicks on it, it'll take them to that moment in the video. And in the actual like scrolling thing at the bottom, forgive me, I don't know what that's called, it'll truncate your video into certain chapters. Fun fact, those chapters are SEO'd extremely well on Google. Let's say, for example, I am creating a video. I keep going back to Workflow Studio, but let's just use that as a use case for this episode, I guess. Let's say I'm making a video on how to create a flow, something very simple. But let's say there's a part of that video that goes into how to do a for loop in Workflow Studio. If I call that specific chapter, that specific sentence, and someone searches that sentence on Google, it will not only link them to my video, but that specific chapter in my video. So that's why chapters are important, not only to help organize your footage and give watchers the ability to jump around nice and easy, but also it's another means of people seeing your content. Now, once you go through your entire video, you've been labeling everything, you've been adding little markers to indicate when certain chapters should start and end. Eventually, you get to a point where you are left exactly with your video, more or less. You're left with all the audio and visuals of your video, but of course, there's a lot on top of that you'd like to add optimally. This is now, once again, we go back to our storyboard to see, hey, what is missing? What visuals do we not have that we now want to add over top of our content? Or also, what things are kind of missing once all of those are even in place? Another fun fact about YouTube, or more so about the broken attention spans that we all have, is there is what is affectionately called the 10-second rule. And no, that's not referring to the hook. That basically means that every 10 seconds, something visually discerning needs to happen in your video to hold people's attention. In fact, I would argue you could probably make it the 5-second rule now because of things like Shorts and TikTok. And by visually discerning, that could be a multitude of things. That could be a new clip. That could be a graphic coming across your screen. That could be a lower third defining something. Or that could even be a jump cut, making me big, making me small for comedic effect. Who knows? That is honestly the most fun part of editing, is adding in those humorous or those editing moments that give your video flair and also give them a sense of your own personality. Up until this point, we've talked a lot about the bare bones of content creation, but we haven't talked about probably one of the most important, which is your brand. One of the mistakes I see most often with starting off content creators is that they skip this process entirely. They don't really think about their brand or think about the image that they want to kind of package for their content. They just want to do more. People create videos with 18 different fonts and different types of clip art that's all these different styles, different colors of different text, and nothing is homogenized and nothing screams them. So defining your brand, honestly, before any of this is actually really important. Now, of course, your brand can grow and change over time, but starting with something simple can unlock a lot of doors. Not only, again, can it help the right audience find your content, but it can also make choices that you make in this editing process a lot simpler. So, for example, here are a couple things that I think of when I think of my personal brand when I create content. First and foremost is to educate and empathize. I personally really enjoy making introductory content to ServiceNow. And I think what I like to lean into the most is the reality of doing new things on ServiceNow. There is so much corporate content that exists out there. It just kind of skims over the warts and bumps that ServiceNow has. No one thinks ServiceNow is perfect. And so instead of kind of ignoring it, I think drawing a light to it is probably the best method to ameliorate that and also showcase that we're listening to feedback. So that's one thing that I really like to lean into. Second of all, because I'm part of the developer team, I kind of like the glitchy graphics and glitchy transitions in my content. You'll see those pretty frequently, whether it's to showcase the jump cut into another video or to emphasize something on the screen. And then lastly, also, is to integrate the ServiceNow brand as much as possible. That means using ServiceNow's colors. That means wearing ServiceNow's colors. And that, of course, means using ServiceNow's font. Internally on our team, I've kind of developed the reputation of being the font arbiter, but because it creates so much visual static when there is too much to see, there's too much to process, it doesn't all flow together. And that's something that's really hard to teach. It's kind of by proxy of me being more in the art world previously than the developer world. But the best recommendation for this is keep things simple. One of the best ways to keep things simple, and it's the only purchase I will recommend in this video, is buy a graphics pack. There are a bajillion existing graphics packs for any editing software that exists. They are relatively inexpensive. I've seen them range from a price of $5 to $50, and they include so many assets that you can also usually pivot to match your things more closely. A lot of those glitchy effects I did not make in Adobe After Effects. I bought them. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And personally, I do not have the expertise in Adobe After Effects to create transitions like that. So that is literally the only thing I will recommend purchasing wise is if you're going to buy anything to make the editing process easier and also to add a bit of panache to your video to keep things simple but professional, buy a graphics pack. So once we have our video, we've added everything on top of it that we need. We've tried to accommodate the 10-second rule as much as possible. We export our video. And you think that's where we end, right? Unfortunately, though the hardest part of video content creation might be done, there's still one more step, which is, of course, promotion. The funniest thing about content creation is I very rarely find people that are actually afraid of making content, but they are much more afraid, honestly, myself included, as calling themselves a content creator. There is something so humbling in the air. Now, maybe it's because there are so many goobers out there that are making content, whether it's like the Aiden Rosses of the world or other people, but there's some cringe factor to being like, I have to tell people I make content. And the sad thing is, yeah, You have to tell them a lot. Of course, you have the YouTube algorithm that will work in your favor, and slowly but surely, as long as your content is credible and well produced, you will develop a following. But that following grows a lot better if you tell your network that you have it. Not only do you have to tell them, but you have to tell them every time you post. If content creation is something you really want to do, you have to be comfortable showcasing that content to your peers, to people you went to college with on LinkedIn that are following you. And just know, oh, this might be a little bit cringe now, but how many people is it really going to help? A lot. And so therefore it is worth it. An additional aspect that's more of the algorithmic side as far as promotion is creating a good thumbnail. A lot of the conversations in which I'm freaking out about fonts is more relative to the thumbnail world than the video itself. I have seen so many amazing videos get skipped because the thumbnails were confusing or frankly a bit jarring. And so again, lean into simplicity. I would much rather see a blue screen with giant green ServiceNow Sans font that just said your video title than a million different fonts and colors that are way too tiny to be seen. And that's the other thing too. Most people are not seeing a 1080p version of your thumbnail. They are seeing something that is the size of 2/4 on their cell phone. And so that is truly what you are designing your thumbnail to be seen as, a postage stamp, nothing more. So be mindful of that. Don't have 8 million graphics. Don't have 8 million fonts. In fact, very rarely should you be including anything other than 2 or 3 big words. Lean into the simplicity. Focus more on the title anyway. And also look at your peers. There are millions of people out there making YouTube videos. Honestly, you got to learn to steal like an artist in that fact. A couple months ago, I started creating an entire database of thumbnails that I just thought were appealing and honestly started to use those in the development of my own thumbnails. And these don't even have to be ServiceNow specific, mind you. Maybe your favorite Twitch streamer created a compilation video and you really liked how that looked. Use that when you are creating things for your own. And yeah, people meme on it a lot, but they're going to have a lot more fun with a thumbnail that has some goofy, excited face than someone just placidly looking at the camera. Lean into the cringe of YouTube. Honestly, that's what has worked thus far with content creators like Mr. Beast and stuff. So why wouldn't it work for us? And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Lauren's crash course on content creation. If you weren't watching the video version, my dog is in my arms and he just gave a big yawn. So I guess he was really riveted by today's podcast. Now, I know this is a bit more of an experimental topic, so please let me know what you think of today's podcast. Were you looking into content creation and didn't know where to start? Do you have any recommendations for others? Leave them in the comments down below. Also, if you've made it this far into the podcast, I am happy to announce that while this podcast has been monthly for the last couple of months in 2025, be rest assured that as of this episode, we are successfully moving back to the bi-weekly version. So there will be double the amount of Breakpoint episodes coming out in this latter part of 2025. So get ready for that. There's a lot more fun coming. There's been a lot fun planned around some big ServiceNow events. So please stay tuned for more. The Breakpoint podcast is brought to you by ServiceNow with executive producer me, Laura McManaman. And please check out the entire retinue of other ServiceNow podcasts that exist. They can be found on the community website. Thank you so much for joining me and Mr. Bo here today. Stay hungry, stay humble, and I'll see y'all next time. And hopefully I'll see you in your next video as well. Cheers.
Please let us know what you think about this podcast. You can leave feedback or ask questions in the ServiceNow community. For more great information on ServiceNow development, check out the ServiceNow developer portal at developer.servicenow.com. Thanks for listening.